Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone to our program on the big balance, maintaining reliability and affordability in pursuit of sustainability, presented by Marc Shkolnick. My name is Peggy Apthorpe, and I am currently working as an AmeriCorps with Conservation Nebraska. Many of you may be familiar with Conservation Nebraska, but we are a statewide nonprofit dedicated to keeping our natural resources healthy. And one of the main ways we do that is through public education programs like the one that we are hosting tonight. Um, we're very grateful for people like Marc who are willing to give their time and talent to help us with our mission of providing public education, and of course to LES, because they have also been very supportive of Conservation Nebraska in many ways. Before I introduce our presenter, we have a few housekeeping items. Right now, your microphone and cameras are off. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will either address them during the program or at the end of the program. Please put, again, a short survey will pop up at the end from Conservation Nebraska so we can get input from you about future planning and funding types of things. And Marc is also going to be using a couple of surveys throughout the presentation. And it's my pleasure to introduce Marc Shkolnick. Excuse me if I read here, he has quite an impressive biography. He has served as manager of energy services for Lincoln Electric System since June of 2007. The department is charged with providing comprehensive and customized customer experience for the city of Lincoln's industrial, commercial, business, and residential customers. His team is also responsible for administering the utilities, energy efficiency, demand response, customer-owned renewables, and emerging technology programs. Marc previously spent 14 years in the alumni relations profession, serving 2.5 years as executive director of the Colorado State University Alumni Association and an associate executive director for the University of Nebraska Alumni Association for 11 years. He's an Omaha native. He received his Bachelor of Science in Education and Master of Education Administration degrees from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He currently serves as a member of the Electric Power Research Institute's Electric Vehicle Advisory Committee, American Public Power Association Smart Energy Program Review Committee, and as a member of the Lincoln Center Kiwanis Club's Board of Directors. So you're a very busy person, Marc. We appreciate your taking the time to be with us tonight, and I will turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you, Peggy. Being busy theoretically is supposed to keep me out of trouble, is what I was told. So, no, everything I'm involved with is a lot of fun, and I do enjoy the opportunity to have these conversations with customers. There's a lot of interest in the energy world right now. There's so many dynamic things going on, so to be able to have a conversation in this area that's rapidly changing is I enjoy it, and I hope that through the course of this discussion, there'll be some thought-provoking conversations and hopefully a few things to take away. This presentation is called The Big Balance, and I've presented on a variety of topics over the years. I've talked about energy efficiency. I've talked about customer-owned solar, had the opportunity to talk about electric vehicles. But I thought it was probably a good time to zoom out and to talk about the industry and what's going on in the industry, because it is a frightening and exciting at both at the same time. It is really a combination of challenges and opportunities, and we're going through a tremendous amount of transition and change. And so I think to have the conversation and so folks can kind of understand at a high level what's going on makes sense. Because if you're just focusing in on one aspect of what we do, you miss the big picture. And so that's what tonight's presentation is all about. And I do want to tell you up front, I don't consider myself to be a deep expert in a lot of these areas, even though I did sleep at a Holiday Inn last night, or at least the commercial suggests that when you sleep at a Holiday Inn, you become an expert. I don't think that's the case. In fact, my staff would probably suggest that I could sleep at a Ritz-Carlton or, a Four Seasons. I still wouldn't be an expert. But actually, in preparation for this presentation, I had the opportunity to sit down with our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer. I had a chance to visit with our Vice President of Energy Delivery. I had a chance to visit with our Vice President of Power Supply, oversees all of our generation and the planning for generation and transmission, as well as a colleague, Scott Benson, who is in our resource and transmission. He manages that area. And the questions I posed to those colleagues was, what has it taken for LES to get where we are today? And what are the challenges that lay ahead? And so I've really coveted the opportunity to sit down with each of those individuals and talk through those things. And so the presentation that I'm sharing with you tonight is really a culmination of those conversations and some reflection. If we were to boil down our industry to one thing, it would be this. This is an electron, and it is governed by physics. And every day, every minute of every day, there's kinetic, thermal, and radiant energy that's being used to generate the flow of electrons to power our lives. The flow of electrons, which is called current, is governed by physics, and that's independent of the affordability of the flow of electrons, and it's independent of the source of fuel that's used to generate the flow of electrons. It's physics. But the thing that people may not realize is that there is a balance that must occur for the whole system to work. At any given moment, the amount of generation must match the amount of power consumption, which we call load in the industry. There has to maintain that balance, to maintain that 60 hertz cycle. This is the AC, the alternating current flow. It's an orderly flow that anything taking electrons to power require in most cases. We're not talking about direct current, we'll just talk about AC. And so this has to be maintained. And that frequency and that voltage, that must be maintained real time every second of every day. So it's real time production and real time consumption. And without that balance, we would have chaos. We'd have large scale outages. We'd have economic disruption. We'd have tremendous safety issues. This has to happen. But I want to tell you that the balance I'm talking about tonight isn't at that micro level, which is critical, of course. It's more at a macro level. And it's really the ability to maintain a balance of these three principles, these three primary objectives of the utility: providing reliability, providing affordability, and providing sustainability. The pursuit of a net zero carbon world and the move towards greater electrification to help get there will greatly challenge this balance and likely will lead to new innovations that will help navigate this unprecedented transition. So in that spirit, I'm going to ask a question, and we're going to pop up a poll. The question is on your screen. We're going to pop it up in the Zoom for you to respond to. And that is, which of the following are important for LES to provide the community? And there we go. And you can answer that right now: reliable, affordable, sustainable, or all of the above. So go ahead and answer that first question. And then when the question or when the answers stop flowing in, I'll have the poll answer revealed. Which of the following are important for LES to provide the community? All right. I think we've allowed enough time. Let's see what our results are here. All of the above, absolutely. And one said that affordable service is most important, and we're going to get to talking about how these compete. But it's very, this is true. We have a community that expects LES to be excellent, world class in our delivery of reliable service, in providing service that's affordable, and in service and generating electrons that reduce the amount of emissions, particularly carbon. And so I'm going to change the question a little bit, and I'm going to ask it in a little different way here. And that is, and we'll pop up the poll question, which one of the following is most important for LES to provide the community? So the first one gave you an all of the above option. Now you need to select which one of them. And it looks like all of the above is listed. You cannot select that one. You have to select one of the top three: reliable, affordable, or sustainable. That all of the above shouldn't be on there. You have to choose one of the top three. And we'll reveal the answers here when the flow of answers comes to an end here, our responses. And what do we have? Let's take a look. Well, of course, all of the above. That shouldn't be selected, but I will tell you, when I asked this question, and Peggy will attest, when I asked this question in front of the, I believe it was the OLLI group, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute Adult Learning Group, and in other presentations that I've asked this question, reliability almost always is number one. And interestingly here, it is only one of you responded as reliable. I would say that in most cases, reliability is the number one response. And in fact, the utility doesn't really have a whole lot of discretion. We are held to standards by the federal government, as we probably should be, to provide reliable service. If you don't make that your top priority, then you've got some problems, and you can be fined significantly if you don't follow certain protocols. So I do want to point out that reliability really is 1A, but all three of those are important, and the utility is tasked constantly with balancing those three. And they don't always play well together, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Before I get into those three attributes, those three characteristics, those three governing principles, I do want to say a word about safety. There is nothing more important, not even reliability, than safety. We will not put the public, nor will we put our employees in harm's way. And safety is a core value, perhaps the biggest value that we have here at LES. We want the public, and we want our colleagues to be safe in the work that they do. And you can imagine that a number of our employees are up on bucket trucks working with high voltage lines, but it includes that group, but it extends throughout the entire company, no matter if you have a job primarily at a desk or computer, whether you're in the tool room, whether you're in financial services, it doesn't matter. Safety is number one. And we also include protection against cyber threats. Cyber is an ongoing issue. Both cyber and physical security are very, very important to us. And so I just want to point out that safety is number one. LES was awarded the Spirit Award by the Nebraska Safety Council just the last month or two, and was named one of Nebraska's safest companies for 2024 by the by the National Safety Council. And it is not the first time that we've gotten that recognition. So we take safety very, very seriously. Let's talk about reliability. Many of you experienced a very unusual event a couple of weeks ago when LES experienced an extended outage across town. This picture that was posted on Facebook, I think, captures the essence very well. The fellow says he's not known as an emotional guy, but he may have just hugged the guy who came out of that truck to restore power. We don't think about reliability until the power's not there. And it reminds us that it's not a given. Despite our best efforts to maintain a robust, resilient distribution system, we have extreme weather events that can cause havoc. And so we were reminded how precious reliability is. with that windstorm a couple of weeks ago. You know, why is reliability important? It goes without saying that without reliability, we don't have a safe community. We don't have a community that has a quality of life that residents of Lincoln and Waverly have become used to having. Obviously, we're not productive in what we do. Our businesses can suffer economic impacts, obviously, from power outages. And it's very hard to attract and retain companies if you don't have a reliable reputation of reliable service. So obviously, these are just a few of the reasons that having a reliable electric system is very, very important. So what does it take? What does it take in LES to become a reliable power provider? Well, one of the things is a diversity of generation types and a diversity of geographic locations for those generators. This is a map of LES's current generation portfolio, and there's even a diversity of types of relationships or ownerships that we have with these different types of generation. Let me get my pointer here. So we have hydropower from the Western Area Power Administration that comes in from the Missouri River, the dams along South Dakota and part of Nebraska, South Dakota border. So we get some renewables from the hydro. We also have fossil generation. We have part ownership in a coal plant south of Council Bluffs, as well as one in eastern Wyoming. And then we have I believe, a power purchase agreement, a contract to purchase power that is generated at the station out in Sutherland here. And then, of course, we have renewables in the region. We've got over 100 megawatts of wind located at various spots across the state, mostly in north central Nebraska. We also have a contract for power and energy out of Kansas and in Oklahoma. And then we have power generation that we primarily own, natural gas and oil north on North 70th, also down at the 8th and J area downtown. That's a older power plant that's brought on infrequently but is used. And then we have our Rokeby station, which is also natural gas and oil. And then, of course, we have a contract for energy generated from the solar out on West Holdridge. Okay, so a diversity of types of generation, a diversity of location of that generation, as well as a diversity of ownership models, whether we own outright or whether we have contracts or whether we have equity ownership in some of these power plants. So if you look at the right here, when you look at the capacity of the various types of generation that LES either contracts for or owns, you'll see it's pretty equal. About 34% come from renewables, hydro and wind, with a little bit of solar and methane gas. I failed to mention that out at the landfill. About 35% is natural gas and oil, and about 31% is coal. Now, on the left-hand side, this is 2020, this is as of 2023. On the left-hand side, this is where the energy came from in 2023. So this is the capacity of all that generation. This is the actual energy generated from that. And you'll see that the breakdown is different. You'll see that 52% of the energy generated from LES's power plants came from coal-fueled plants. 33% came from wind, and smaller pieces came from the others. About 8% came from hydro. And that's because we're part of a larger regional transmission organization called the Southwest Power Pool. This is the area of the Southwest Power Pool, and it is one of a number of regional transmission organizations across the country. These are various regional transmission organizations, and they play various roles. They are a balancing authority, which means when I talked about the minute-to-minute balance that occurs to keep frequency and voltage in check, that's the role that they're playing. They do so out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and they do that for the entire footprint. We're talking an area over 550,000 square miles, from the Canadian border down to the Texas Panhandle. And LES's generation, along with all of the other generation, of which there's 950 power plants in this entire area, they're generating all the energy to serve the customers in this region. Some are utilities, many are, but there are others that are just generators. They're generating renewables, or they're generating another type of fuel source to create the electrons, the current flow in this area. So we are part of a much larger area, region in which we sell energy, and they operate the market as well, that we sell all that energy that we generate. They're determining on an economic and reliability basis when to turn on certain units. We bid those units in, and then we're directed when to turn those on and how long to run them, that type of thing. And of course, there's the transmission as well that's required to bring all of that power from different locations into the population centers. The transmission is an important part of it, and Southwest Power Pool helps to coordinate the development of the transmission corridors and the construction of that. So that is a little bit about the Southwest Power Pool, of which we are a part. One of the major trends that has occurred over the last 10 years is the decline in coal-fired power. In 2014, 10 years ago, 60% of the energy generated came from coal. And as of 2023, that was a little less than 30%. This green line is also noticeable because most of the other fuel sources have been pretty steady, but this green line is wind. A lot of wind generation. And that's great because wind does not generate carbon. But wind is not the same as having a fossil fuel or dispatchable generator. The wind blows at Mother Nature's discretion. Utilities do not have control over when that wind blows. Utilities have had control over when the fossil generators have run. And in fact, coal has primarily been what we call baseload generation. In other words, it runs many, many, many hours throughout the year, with the exception of either forced outages or maintenance. And so we need a replacement. We need a replacement that respects the environment, that is affordable and is reliable. And that is really where we're at as an industry, is trying to find that replacement, because we need to be able to provide power when that intermittent solar and wind isn't generating energy. And I also don't want to forget the importance of transmission. You know, much of what I'm talking about is out of sight, out of mind. It's very unusual for a person to see a power plant. They're usually unsightly and they're not in full view. And in many instances for Lincoln, our power plants are located in other states. Well, the same is true about transmission. You don't see it. It's out there. If you're in rural Nebraska, you may see it, but it blends into the background after a while. But transmission is very important to bring in energy, particularly from the remote areas where the wind blows the most steady. And the challenge with transmission is a lot of people don't want transmission running along their property. There's permitting challenges. And of course, there's costs. This is enormously expensive. So transmission is very important. It can be a challenge, but it's part of the reliability game. And finally, and nothing's been more apparent since the windstorm, is the importance of having a well-planned and maintained distribution system. When I talk about a distribution system, I'm talking about the lines in our neighborhood that take it from the bulk power system and run it through our community to our homes and to our loads, our businesses, organizations. It includes the transformers on the lines. It includes the substations, all of that. And LES invests a lot in maintenance, proactive maintenance, making sure that our distribution system is well maintained. We've had a series of programs over the last 10 or 15 years to proactively maintain and to efficiently replace cable. We've installed duct throughout the city. We've replaced cable throughout the city. We've moved overhead to underground. We do thermal imaging of equipment to ensure that our equipment is running as optimally as possible. And we do invest in good equipment. And we do make sure there's ample capacity for growth when we construct our distribution system. And of course, vegetation management. And that's one of the challenges. Of course, when the windstorm blew through, it was primarily a tree line event, tree limbs falling into lines, causing outages, falling on lines. We've had some lightning strikes, but a lot of it was tree line issues. And so we do have an active vegetation management to try to address that as best we can while still respecting the fact that we've got a very lovely tree canopy in the community. So how are we doing in the reliability area? Well, the American Public Power Association has awarded LES a diamond level, the highest level of reliable public power provider designation. And that recognizes excellence in workforce development, planning and system improvement, safety, maintenance, and operations. All of these areas are key for reliable service. This bar chart shows how we compare regionally and nationally on a couple of metrics. The first one is called Service Average Interruption Duration Index. In other words, if we took all the minutes in a year that we had outage and we divided by the number of customers, this is how much time an average customer would expect to be out in a year. Then the national average is over 2 hours. And in 2023, LES experienced about 19 minutes per customer. Our goal is to be less than 30 for normal weather. And obviously a couple of weeks ago, that was considered a major event day, right? That's not normal weather. So even in 2023, we were quite good. You can see where things go when you factor in severe weather, major event days. Another reliability metric is called CAIDI. That's called the Circuit Average Interruption Duration Index. And that is if a customer experiences an outage, how long can they expect to be out on average? Our goal is to remain under 60 minutes. We were just a little bit over in 2023, but we compared very favorably to the region at 101 minutes and to the national average at 118 minutes. And looking at future challenges and opportunities in the area of reliability, one is the potential tension between our continued investment in our distribution system and the potential added cost of generation that gets us to meet our net zero goal. There will be added expense as we need to meet reserve margins and being able to provide reliable service. And so that could be a tension that we're going to have to navigate through. Obviously, major event, extreme weather. We experienced that a couple of weeks ago. That storm, what's called the Husker Howler is what the storm was called, was the third most impactful outage event in our LES history. In 1993, we had a straight line wind event. That was the second. And then, of course, if you remember, 1997, we had that early snowstorm that brought down tons of trees, and that was the all-time. But we're starting to see a little bit more frequency, not just in the wind type events, but the polar vortex types of activities that put a strain on generation and a lot of the infrastructure. So we're going to need to have a resilient grid from the generator all the way down to the service drop at the home. Cybersecurity will continue to be a challenge to protect the system against cyber attacks that are constantly being attempted by bad actors domestically and internationally. Supply chain has really disrupted the industry in getting transformers and other assets. This continues to be a problem. It is uncertain when that's going to clear up. I'm going to take a pause because I've been talking quite a bit, and I've covered the first attribute, and we've got a couple more to go. They're not quite as long, but I'd like to pause, Peggy, and see if there's any questions at this point.
Okay. We have one question. I just read that the demands of only AI will require 8%
Hmm.
of our electrical load nationwide. Thoughts on the impact
Hmm.
on the state and specifically LES?
Joe, great question. We're going to get to that. Uh, this is true. Artificial intelligence requires roughly 10 times the amount of power that a typical data center would require. No question. To be able to serve reliably, um, artificial intelligence, data servers, facilities for AI is going to be a real challenge as we make this transition from our current sources of energy to new to additional renewables. That will be a challenge we're going to have to navigate through. What year is the LES goal to reach net zero? 2040 is the goal that the year that we are shooting for to hit net zero from our own generating resources. So thank you for those questions. Appreciate it, and we'll continue on, and I want to keep the conversation going. The second major principle, of course, is affordability. And it's important because obviously we have a community that includes vulnerable populations, fixed incomes, and every time we have to make a rate adjustment upwards, it puts pressure on those households. And so we're balancing everything with trying to provide affordable service. We did a little exercise with rates recently. If LES's rates were at the national average, $60 million more would have gone to the utility rather than to the community. So by having low rates, by having the rates we have compared to the national average residential rates, that frees up $60 million to be spent in the economy of Lincoln. And so that's really important. So it impacts the local economy when we don't have affordable rates. And it certainly impacts economic development and attracting and retaining employers to the area. Affordability, in visiting with our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, there's a number of key financial metrics that we try to hit that govern how we set our rates and how we establish our budget so that we do maintain as affordable a rates as we can. Maintaining a AA long-term bond rating is critical because we do have borrowings for all of those assets I talked about. And so having the lowest possible interest rates on that debt is very, very important. We also focus on rate stability. We do not have wildly fluctuating rates, and we really focus on trying to maintain that. We also have a philosophy called cost of service, where we have customer rate classes and we try to minimize, if not eliminate, cross-subsidization. We don't want residential customers to subsidize through their rates a business class, a rate class. We try to allocate costs for the utility from the generation all the way down to all the services that are provided on a class-by-class basis. That's a cost of service principle. We've actually restructured our rates over the last 5 to 10 years, removing a lot of fixed costs that were part of the energy charge. So you've noticed your energy charge has gone down. Those fixed costs have been taken out and put into a fixed customer facilities charge so that we adequately recover those costs to pay for all of that infrastructure that provides reliable service. We need to have market competitive generation. When our generation is being purchased into the market, that's revenues that's coming back to the utility, which is all ratepayers, to maintain our low rates. So we need to have well-maintained market competitive generation of many types. And to leverage low interest rates for long-term debt. As I said, we have a lot of borrowings. I'm going to ask this question. I'll have the poll question pop up. The question is, what was the average 2023 LES residential bill? The average LES residential bill, you have 4 choices, 80 to 90, 91 to 100, 101 to 110, or more than 110. And I'll give you a few seconds to respond. What was the average 2023 LES bill? All right. If we have sufficient feedback, let's share the results.
Just a second. There's still a couple coming in.
Okay, absolutely. Few dawdlers are probably choosing between one of two options. All right, what we got? 91 to 100, 60%. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. The 20% who said 80 to 90, they're the right answers. Our average bill was $84 in most recently among 87 peer cities, benchmark cities. We were in the top quartile. $84 was the average residential bill. We were first for residential. First. In all of our rates, averaged together, we were 8th of 87 cities. We're also the 4th most stable rate. Our rate adjustments have averaged over the last decade, that was as of 2022, about 1.3%, 1.4%. And as terms of energy burden, which is the percentage of a person's household income that goes to energy, we are at about 1.6%, which again is in very good company. That's important. That's important. These are metrics that we look at in terms of how we perform. And those financial metrics I went over with you just a little bit ago is those are all the dials, if you will, in the cockpit of the plane to make sure that we are flying this financially at the right altitude in the right direction. But affordability will have future challenges and opportunities. You saw the graph about coal plant retirements. Some of those coal plants have run their useful life. Others will be retired early because of regulations that they cannot feasibly meet. And so we have made a concerted effort to pay down our debt, off our debt on some of those coal plants so that we don't have stranded assets should additional regulations come into play so that we get all the debt paid as best we can. We are in a higher interest rate environment, and so we can't leverage low interest rates like we could before, and it makes that more challenging. And of course, there will be costs for new generation and grid modernization going forward. So this will challenge our affordability. It will certainly be a challenge for utilities across the country. And so the third item, the third driving key principle is sustainability. What's it take to get where we're at as a utility right now? Since 2010, LES has been adding renewable generation, primarily wind generation. This started back in 2011 when we entered into our first power purchase agreement for wind in Nebraska, followed the following year by 13 more megawatts in another wind farm in Nebraska. And then in 2015 was the year that we purchased a lot of wind, more in Nebraska, but also in Kansas and Oklahoma. And that's what got us to the roughly 34% of capacity being wind generation. We brought on the solar through a power purchase agreement in 2016. And we also exited out of a coal plant in 2017. But you can see the trajectory for us to get in 2040 to get down to net zero. We still have work to do. And we need to do this in a very uncertain environment. We need to do this in an environment where reliability continues to be king, as it should. But the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And so that therein becomes the problem, because we will have, as every utility will have, requirements for capacity by the Southwest Power Pool to ensure that there's enough power generation available on the hottest day or the coldest day. We'll have to meet those requirements. And renewables because they're intermittent, likely won't count as much towards that capacity requirement as those that you can dispatch and turn on and off. I'll also point out that LES continues its investments in energy efficiency incentives through our sustainable energy program, through our demand response program called Peak Rewards, in which we have roughly 4,000, over 4,000 smart thermostats that we are able to control on a select number of hot summer days to control our peak that's set for power during the summer. And then also facilitating customer-owned solar, like net metered solar on the roofs of homes and businesses, that type of thing. We also engage in a lot of research activities for emerging technologies like electric vehicles. And as already mentioned, the board set a target of net zero by 2040 from LES's generating fleet. We'll aim to eliminate or offset carbon dioxide production from our generation portfolio by 2040. We've been recognized by the American Public Power Association 3 consecutive 2-year terms with a smart energy provider, recognizing excellence in customer programs, including energy efficiency, demand response, and a variety of other customer programs that allow customer participation in the efforts to become more sustainable. So I mentioned before, finding a new, clean, affordable, dispatchable baseload fuel is really going to be a huge, huge challenge and opportunity. And it's unclear as to when this is all going to kind of break through. Changing regulations and policies at the federal level and at other levels of government always are creating an uneven topography and an uncertain future as to how we're going to achieve this and navigating through all of this change. Intermittency, we've already discussed, is the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, and that creates a real challenge. I want to talk to you a little bit more about this whole intermittency. This graph shows a typical day in the summer. The green shows the demand for energy, the demand for power from let's say it's Lincoln. And so you start off at 1 in the morning and you kind of bottom out, unsurprisingly, middle of the night. And as people wake up and businesses start up and all this type of thing, you get growing amounts of demand. And so you essentially, at the hottest part of the day, you peak out, right? Your demand for energy is right here, it's peak. You need to have all of your capacity running on this summer day between 5 and 6 p.m. This is pretty common in this part of the country to see that peak occur right in here, okay? Now, if we introduce wind as a generating resource, what we find is, and this is an average, on any given day, it will be in different places, but on average, what we find is that wind is being produced primarily overnight. And if you notice, it's producing more than what's being demanded. And yes, there is some storage. There is battery storage that's being deployed, but most of that, if not all of it, is 4-hour or less. It's not long duration storage. So that will help a little bit. But we do have times when prices go negative because there's so much energy being delivered and not enough demand for it that you have wind. Notice what's not going on here at the peak. The wind isn't blowing. That's very common when we have this hot day that the wind isn't blowing. It's humid, it's still. We see a little bit of ramp up in the early to mid evening. Now, if we introduce solar, the average capacity curve for solar is in the middle of the day, right? And out in areas like California, they have a real issue with overproduction of solar during the middle of the day. More energy being generated because of the rooftop solar than they have power. But again, what's running here? What's happening in this area when the solar isn't producing, or in this little sliver? Well, you have to have another option. You have to have a dispatchable option. Right now, a lot of that is either being handled by the coal units that remain, or you have natural gas units. Natural gas tends to be a more volatile fuel source, so the prices can be volatile. And so this really is the challenge with just relying on on renewables. We need a lot more than that to deliver that reliable and affordable service. And oh, by the way, there are days when it's cloudy and the wind isn't blowing, particularly in the winter. And what do you do to provide this level of power? And usually in the winter, you're going to have a twin. You're going to have a peak in the morning. You're going to have a peak in the evening because of heating. And so this is our challenge. This is our challenge. It isn't so much that we shouldn't be, we obviously we need to use renewables, absolutely. There's a lot of good things about renewable energy and solar and wind, but we also needed another option that we can employ. And again, we're seeing the coal plants are tapering off. And so what are some of those other options? Well, perhaps small modular nuclear reactors that are standardized, maybe a little less expensive. They're extraordinarily expensive right now to develop, and they take 10 or 12 years. There's only been 1 or 2 nuclear plants that have gone online since 1980, but there is a lot of research and development in this area. And you may have read in the paper that the Nebraska Public Power District is looking for some sites to do something with what we call an SMR, small modular reactor. So this could be part of the answer going forward. Using hydrogen as part of the fuel mix, or to displace the use of greenhouse gases in certain industries, is going to be probably a part of the future going forward. This is a battery storage unit. Obviously, we're going to need battery storage. And there's a big question about whether we can capture carbon with our conventional fossil fuel plants and capture and sequester that carbon underground or in caverns or things of that nature. But there's a lot of research and development going on in this area. And then there's also geothermal heating from the earth. There's a lot of R&D going on in that area as well. That's very geographic dependent. You know, somebody already made the point that AI is a growing trend. Obviously, more power. Also, we're going to see more electrification in the transportation sector. A little over 9% of all the cars purchased this last quarter were electric vehicles. And going into the future, we'll see more adoption of electric vehicles. So that's more electrification. There's just the regular old data centers, and then there's, data mining, cryptocurrency, that type of thing. So there is an electrifying economy, and utilities are going to have to make this transition from a generation standpoint and a transmission standpoint and from a distribution standpoint while accommodating additional electric load. So I'm going to begin to wrap this up. I want to ask this question, and I'm going to have you put it in the chat, actually. Who owns Lincoln Electric System? Do you want to put that in the chat? Who owns Lincoln Electric System? I'm not sure if I can see that or not. Trying to see answers as they come in. Okay, I've seen one. I don't know, consortium, okay. The people. Somebody put in we do. What are some others? Well, Peggy and Johnette, you're right. You do. If you're a ratepayer, if you're a customer of LES, you own Lincoln Electric System. We're not an investor-owned utility. We're not owned by private shareholders that live in other areas of the country. We're owned by the ratepayers, and the ratepayers are represented by a mayoral-appointed administrative board. And so I think it's important to think about the fact that we are a public power provider. In fact, we're the only state in the country that's 100% public power by state statute. Every electric provider is public power. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we are into long range, not quarterly planning. We're not on earnings calls every quarter with our investors. We are planning for the long haul. And that is, I think, a real positive. We have local control, governance, and transparency in all that we do. Every month we have our administrative board meetings open to the public. We do a lot of public outreach and activity such as these kinds of discussions. We have access to tax exempt financing, which allows us to get the lowest possible interest rates available in our borrowings. As I said, our ratepayers are our shareholders, and the dividend you get is the lowest rates, the most reliable and sustainable service we can provide. So every time you pay your bill, you are investing in that reliable service. And so it only makes sense to thank you for being one of our ratepayers, because you are investing in public power, and our obligation as your provider is to provide you with that reliable, affordable, and ever increasingly sustainable energy. Okay, I'm going to pause now. I've covered the information that I wanted to on the balance between the reliability, affordability, and sustainability, and I'd like to address questions. And I don't know if folks are set up that they can unmute or not. If it's set up as webinar, maybe they can't, but at the very least, I certainly would love to see what questions have been provoked through the presentation.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we can unmute people, but if you put them in the Q&A or the chat,
Yep.
that'd be great. I guess I might have a question. I know we no longer have the wind turbines
Correct.
in Lincoln, but we're buying wind energy from other locations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So those two wind turbines combined had a capacity of 1.2 megawatts. They were 600 kilowatts each. Now you're saying, well, what does that mean? Well, one typical wind turbine today can be as much as 3 megawatts. So we put those wind turbines in the late 90s, and they were early vintage, and so they ran their life. There was a lot of mechanical issues with them towards the end. They ran their life. The technology in wind generation has come dramatically far since that time, and so I think they serve their purpose. We also noted that Lincoln isn't really the best place for wind turbines. The wind does not blow as constant as it does out in the Sandhills and the north central part of the state, where it's typical to see 45 to 50% of the time the wind turbines are producing at their capacity, where in Lincoln it was about 20 to 25%.
Yeah. Huh.
So location on wind.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it used to be that you'd build power plants near load centers, cities, and now with renewables, you have to go where the wind's blowing, and oftentimes there isn't transmission infrastructure there, so you have to build that as well.
Nobody has any questions? I guess I might also have a question about the solar farm.
Yes.
Is that a contractual thing? Like
it is.
And will that
Yes.
when will that be renewed again, that contract, or do you happen to know that?
I should know off the top of my head. I want to say that's about I'm going to say a 20-year power purchase agreement.
Okay.
So at the end of that time, then we'll have decisions to make as to whether we will purchase the solar from the developer, whether it will be decommissioned. Technology has advanced so much that there has been efficiency gains in the solar itself. We're now seeing over 400 watts per panel, when that was, it's only been the last couple of years. So there continues to be this technological advancement and this efficiency. And so I guess we'll find out when we come to the end of the contract what makes sense.
Yeah. Well, no questions.
I would.
Well,
I do. It would be very valuable for those of you who are joining, and I want to thank everybody for joining this evening. If there's one takeaway through all of the stuff that we covered tonight that you want to put in the chat, that would be very interesting. I see there's a feedback survey. Obviously, that's very valuable because I know I can make this a better presentation each time I do it. But if there's a takeaway you want to put in the chat, filling out the survey, and I'll put my email address, by the way. If anybody has anything that they have a question about, I will put my email address in the chat, and then you can email me with that.
Okay.
And let me, I think that was it.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I mean, that's a really interesting presentation. One person has said, my takeaway is the challenge of having clean energy capacity available when it is needed.
Yeah, the gap between highest usage and highest production.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Tammy. That's a real challenge, because the expectation, of course, would be that we have generation 24/7, 365 under all conditions, and there are gaps. There's a lot of gaps, and we need to be able to deliver that energy reliably. And so it's how do we complement and integrate the renewables with new and evolving technologies for dispatchability.
Yeah. Well, and I think you've mentioned before, we need to have a diversified portfolio.
Diversity. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we could probably keep you. I had another question. We recently went to the Columbus hydropower plant.
Okay.
And I do you see any future expansion in that area, or?
Possibly. I would say that most of the great hydro locations across the country have already built hydro. It is very, very expensive energy source as well, but it is a really good one. So it's possible, but I think the challenge there is finding new areas. There are some environmental concerns too about the impacts to wildlife in the waters. And then of course there are droughts, and you run into problems with droughts with hydro. You just don't get the output when the river flow is considerably lower. So looks like somebody had as a renter to an older home, what are inexpensive ways I can incorporate sustainability in my home? It's a great question. Some of the low cost, no cost things are weather stripping, and of course when you're in a rented home, that's a little more challenging. But if you do have the freedom to weather strip and to make sure that you don't have a lot of infiltration of air, that often is an easy thing to do. Being mindful of the thermostat settings, particularly when you're away from home. There are some really inexpensive internet connected thermostats, and if you work with the landlord, they can help you with that. And then if you're, obviously, if you come to the end of life on an air conditioner or a heat pump, something like that, the Lincoln Electric system has incentives that landlords can take advantage of as well to put in more efficient units. Something as simple as drawing the blinds on the west side of the house in the afternoon. You'd be surprised how much impact that'll make on the thermal load of the home.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we have to thank you. Mark, I think you and LES are real assets to the community, and we really appreciate your taking the time to do this. It will be recorded, so if anybody missed it, it will be up in a couple weeks for sure on Conservation Nebraska YouTube channel.
Thank you, Peggy.
Anyway, thank you, and I guess we can say goodnight to everybody. Thank you very much for being here.